In a quiet town in Ohio, where the streets were lined with old brick buildings and the air carried the faint smell of autumn leaves, a young journalist named Claire Harper sat nervously at her desk. She was known for her sharp mind and fearless questions, always ready to challenge those in power. Her articles often sparked heated debates, and she took pride in standing up for what she believed was right. But today, as she prepared for an interview that could shape her career, Claire felt a mix of excitement and unease. The person she was about to meet was J.D. Vance, a man whose name had been on everyone's lips lately. He was a rising political figure, admired by some and criticized by others. What made him stand out wasn't just his ideas, but also his strong Christian faith, which he openly talked about in public. Many saw it as a guiding force in his life, while others questioned whether it clouded his judgment. For Claire, this was the perfect opportunity to dig deeper into a topic that had divided opinions across the country. Claire spent hours researching J.D. Vance before their meeting. She read his speeches, watched interviews, and even scrolled through social media posts where people debated his beliefs. The more she learned, the more she realized how complicated this story was. On one hand, J.D.'s faith seemed to inspire him to help others, especially those from struggling communities like the one he grew up in. On the other hand, some critics argued that his religious views might make it hard for him to represent everyone fairly, especially in a country as diverse as the United States. As the day of the interview approached, Claire couldn't stop thinking about the question she wanted to ask. It was bold, direct, and maybe even a little uncomfortable. Is J.D. Vance too Christian for office? She wondered aloud to herself late one night as she typed notes on her laptop. She knew the question might upset some people, but that didn't bother her. Claire believed in asking tough questions even if they made others squirm. After all, wasn't that the job of a journalist? To seek the truth no matter how messy it got? On the morning of the interview, Claire woke up early. The white sky outside her window was gray, and a light drizzle coated the streets. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that looked professional yet approachable. As she drove to the cafe where they were scheduled to meet, her thoughts raced. Would J.D. be defensive? Would he dodge her questions? Or would he surprise her with an answer she hadn't expected? Claire gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to calm her nerves. When she arrived, the cafe was warm and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. J.D. was already there, sitting at a corner table near the window. He looked younger in person than he did on TV, with a friendly smile that put Claire at ease. She walked over and introduced herself, shaking his hand firmly. "Thanks for meeting with me," she said, taking a seat across from him. "I'm looking forward to our conversation." J.D. nodded, his expression open and relaxed. "Of course," he replied. "I appreciate the chance to talk about these things. They're important." His tone was calm, almost reassuring, but Claire reminded herself not to let her guard down. This wasn't just a casual chat. It was an interview, and she had a job to do. They started with small talk, discussing the weather and the cozy atmosphere of the cafe. But soon, Claire steered the conversation toward the heart of the matter. She leaned forward slightly, her pen poised above her notebook. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Some people have raised concerns about your strong Christian beliefs. Do you think being too Christian could affect your ability to serve all Americans equally?" The moment the words left her mouth, Claire felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was the question she had been rehearsing in her mind for days. Now that it was out there, hanging in the air between them, she watched J.D. closely for his reaction. To her surprise, he didn't flinch or look annoyed. Instead, he paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "I understand why people might ask that," J.D. finally said, his voice calm and measured. "Faith is a big part of who I am, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I also believe that faith teaches us to care for others, to listen, to serve, and to find common ground. It's not about imposing my beliefs on anyone. It's about doing what's best for everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs." Claire scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing to process his response. It wasn't what she had expected. JD didn't sound defensive or dismissive. Instead, he came across as sincere and reflective. Still, she wasn't ready to let go of the topic just yet. But isn't there a risk, she pressed on, that your personal convictions might clash with the needs of a diverse society? How do you balance that? JD took a sip of his coffee, giving himself a moment to think. When he spoke again, his tone was softer, tinged with vulnerability. That's a fair question, he admitted. And honestly, it's something I've struggled with myself. There are times when my faith challenges me to step outside my comfort zone, to see things from someone else's perspective. It's not always easy, but I think that's the point. Faith shouldn't divide us. It should push us to connect with others, even when we disagree. Claire listened intently, her initial skepticism beginning to waver. She had gone into the interview expecting a confrontation, but what she was hearing now was different. JD wasn't denying the complexity of the issue. Instead, he was acknowledging it head-on. His answers weren't polished sound bites designed to win over critics. They felt genuine, raw even. For the first time, Claire found herself wondering if she had misjudged him. The cafe buzzed around them, oblivious to the weighty exchange unfolding at their table. Outside, raindrops slid down the window pane, casting rippling shadows on the wooden floor. Claire glanced at her notes, then back at JD, who was watching her patiently. She realized that this wasn't just another interview. It was a moment of connection, a rare chance to bridge the gap between two very different perspectives. As the conversation continued, Claire decided to shift gears slightly. Instead of focusing solely on JD's faith, she asked him about his upbringing and how it shaped his views. He spoke candidly about growing up in Middletown, a place where poverty and hardship were constants, but so was resilience. He talked about the role his community played in helping him overcome obstacles and how faith was woven into the fabric of everyday life. Hearing him speak, Claire could almost picture the world he described, a world far removed from her own experiences growing up in a bustling city. For the first time since the interview began, Claire felt a flicker of understanding. Maybe JD's faith wasn't just about rules or dogma. Maybe it was about relationships, about finding strength in shared values and using that strength to lift others up. It was a realization that made her pause and rethink everything she thought she knew about him. By the time they wrapped up their conversation, the rain had stopped and sunlight peeked through the clouds. Claire packed up her things, thanked JD for his time, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. As she walked back to her car, she replayed their discussion in her mind, turning over his words like puzzle pieces. Something inside her had shifted during those hours at the cafe. Whether it was curiosity, empathy, or simply a willingness to see beyond her biases, Claire knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't going to be as straightforward as she had imagined. The next morning, Claire woke up with a sense of restlessness. Her mind kept replaying snippets of the interview with JD Vance, especially the moments when his answers had caught her off guard. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, and staring out the window as the sun slowly rose over the rooftops. The golden light spilled into her small apartment, but it didn't bring the clarity she hoped for. Instead, it only deepened her confusion. Claire had always prided herself on being objective, on asking tough questions without letting personal feelings get in the way. But this time felt different. JD's words lingered in her thoughts, not because they were polished or rehearsed, but because they seemed genuine. He hadn't dodged her questions or tried to sugarcoat his beliefs. In fact, he had opened up in ways she hadn't anticipated, sharing parts of himself that made her question her own assumptions. She pulled out her notebook and flipped through the pages filled with hurried scribbles from the cafe. One line stood out. Faith shouldn't divide us. It should push us to connect with others. At the time, she had written it down almost reflexively, not fully grasping its weight. Now, as she read it again, she realized how much it resonated with her own values. Growing up in a multicultural city, Claire had learned early on that understanding people required more than just listening. It meant stepping into their shoes, even if they didn't fit perfectly. Still, Claire wasn't ready to let go of her skepticism entirely. She decided to dig deeper into JD's background, hoping to find evidence that would either confirm or challenge what he had said. She spent hours poring over articles, watching old interviews, and scrolling through social media threads where people debated his policies and beliefs. Some praised him for his honesty and compassion, while others accused him of using religion as a shield for controversial stances. The more she read, the more conflicted she became. One particular story caught her attention. It was about a struggling single mother in Middletown who credited JD with helping her navigate the complexities of government assistance programs. According to the article, JD had visited her home personally, listened to her struggles, and connected her with resources that changed her family's life. Claire found herself wondering, was this an isolated incident or was it indicative of a larger pattern? Could someone so deeply rooted in their faith also be genuinely committed to serving people from all walks of life? To get a clearer picture, Claire decided to reach out to some of the individuals mentioned in these stories. She started with Sarah Bennett, the single mother from the article. After a few phone calls, they arranged to meet at a local diner. When Claire arrived, Sarah was already seated at a booth sipping a milkshake and scrolling through her phone. She looked younger than Claire had imagined, with tired eyes but a warm smile. "Thanks for meeting with me," Claire said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I wanted to hear your side of things." Sarah nodded, setting her phone aside. "Of course," she replied. "I don't mind talking about it. JD really did help me when I didn't know where else to turn." "As he?" Sarah spoke. Claire listened intently, jotting down notes. The woman described how JD had taken the time to understand her situation, connecting her with counselors, job training programs, and financial aid. What struck Claire most was Sarah's tone, grateful but not blindly loyal. She acknowledged that JD wasn't perfect and that she didn't agree with everything he stood for, but she emphasized that his actions had made a tangible difference in her life. "He never pushed his beliefs on me," Sarah added. "He just listened and helped however he could. That's all anyone can ask for, right?" Claire nodded thoughtfully, her pen hovering above her notebook. Hearing Sarah's perspective gave her a new layer of insight into JD's approach. Maybe his faith wasn't about imposing his views, but about motivating him to act. Still, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She thanked Sarah for her time and promised to stay in touch before heading back to her car. Over the next few days, Claire reached out to several other people who had crossed paths with JD. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. There was Mark, a factory worker who had attended one of JD's town hall meetings and appreciated his willingness to address tough issues like opioid addiction. Then there was Maria, a teacher who admired JD's focus on education reform, but disagreed with some of his economic policies. Their stories painted a complex portrait of a man who inspired both admiration and criticism. Despite the mixed feedback, one theme emerged consistently: JD's ability to connect with people on a personal level. Whether he agreed with them or not, he seemed to genuinely care about their struggles. For Claire, this was both fascinating and frustrating. On one hand, it challenged the narrative she had initially set out to write, a straightforward critique of how religion might hinder public service. On the other hand, it forced her to confront her own biases and consider the possibility that leadership wasn't as black and white as she had once believed. Back at her desk, Claire stared at her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She knew she needed to start writing, but the words wouldn't come. How could she capture the complexity of JD Vance in a way that felt honest and fair? Every sentence she typed felt incomplete, as if it failed to convey the depth of what she had experienced during her research. Frustrated, she decided to take a break and clear her head. She grabbed her coat and headed outside, walking aimlessly through the streets of her neighborhood. The crisp autumn air helped calm her racing thoughts, and she found herself reflecting on why she had become a journalist in the first place. It wasn't just about uncovering scandals or holding people accountable. It was about telling stories that mattered, stories that could spark meaningful conversations. As she walked, Claire realized something important. The story of JD Vance wasn't just about him. It was about the people he interacted with, the communities he represented, and the broader questions of faith, leadership, and diversity in America. To do justice to this topic, she needed to weave all those threads together, creating a narrative that was as nuanced as the world it sought to describe. By the time she returned home, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. She sat down at her desk, cracked her knuckles, and began typing. This time the words flowed more easily. She wrote about her initial doubts and the questions that had driven her to pursue the story. She included anecdotes from her conversations with Sarah, Mark, and Maria, highlighting the diverse perspectives she had encountered along the way. And she reflected on her own journey, the moments of doubt, discovery, and growth that had shaped her understanding of J.D. Vance. As the hours passed, Claire's apartment grew quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of her keyboard. Outside, the sky darkened and streetlights flickered on, casting soft glows onto the pavement below. By the time she finished her draft, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. For the first time since starting this project, she believed she had captured the essence of the story. Not just the facts, but the emotions and humanity behind them. Before sending her article to her editor, Claire reread it carefully, making sure every word rang true. As she scrolled through the final paragraphs, she paused at one sentence she had written earlier. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we least expect to find. It summed up her experience perfectly. This story had challenged her in ways she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to confront uncomfortable questions and rethink long-held beliefs. And while she still didn't have all the answers, she knew, one thing for certain, the pursuit of truth was rarely easy, but it was always worth it. The following day, Claire arrived at the office early, her mind buzzing with thoughts about the article she had drafted. She knew it was good, perhaps one of the most honest pieces she had ever written, but she also knew it wouldn't be easy to publish. Her editor, a seasoned journalist named Margaret, was known for her sharp eye and even sharper critiques. Claire braced herself as she sent the draft to Margaret's inbox and waited anxiously for feedback. Margaret didn't keep her waiting long. Within an hour, Claire received a message asking her to come to her desk. When she entered Margaret's cluttered workspace, the older woman looked up from her computer screen, her expression unreadable. "Claire," Margaret began, gesturing for her to sit. "This is different." The word hung in the air like a question mark, leaving Claire, unsure whether it was praise or criticism. Margaret leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "You've taken on a sensitive topic here, and you've done it in a way that's thoughtful. But I need to ask, are you ready for the backlash?" Her tone wasn't harsh, it was measured, almost concerned. Claire nodded slowly, though her stomach churned at the thought of what might come next. She knew writing about J.D. Vance's faith and her own evolving perspective would stir controversy, but she also believed it was a story worth telling no matter the cost. Margaret sighed and pushed her glasses further up her nose. "Look, I'm not saying don't publish it. In fact, I think this could be one of your strongest pieces yet. But you need to prepare yourself. People are going to have strong opinions, and not all of them will be kind." Claire thanked her for the advice, then returned to her desk, feeling both nervous and determined. She made a few minor edits based on Margaret's suggestions, adding more context to certain points and clarifying her own reflections. By late afternoon, the article was ready to go live. When the piece finally appeared online, Claire refreshed the page repeatedly, watching the comments section fill up faster than she had expected. Some readers praised her for tackling such a complex issue with nuance and empathy. Others accused her of being too soft on J.D. Vance, questioning whether she had compromised her principles. A few even called her biased, claiming she had let her personal feelings cloud her judgment. The range of reactions was overwhelming, but Claire reminded herself why she had written the article in the first place: to spark meaningful conversations, not to please everyone. Amidst the flood of responses, one comment stood out. It was from someone who identified themselves as a pastor in Ohio. He wrote, "As someone who shares J.D. Vance's faith, I appreciate how this article highlights the tension between personal beliefs and public service. Faith should inspire us to serve others, not exclude them. Thank you for exploring this topic with honesty. Reading those words gave Claire a small sense of validation, a reminder that her work mattered, even if not everyone agreed with her. Over the next few days, the article gained traction, sparking discussions on social media and even earning mentions in larger news outlets. Claire found herself fielding interview requests from other journalists eager to discuss her perspective. At first, she was hesitant to step into the spotlight, fearing it would shift the focus away from the story itself. But eventually, she agreed to a podcast appearance, hoping to emphasize the importance of listening and understanding in journalism. During the recording, the host asked Claire a question that caught her off guard. Do you think your views on J.D. Vance changed because of your interactions with him, or was it something else entirely? Claire paused, considering the answer carefully. I think it was a combination of things, she replied. Talking to J.D. gave me insight into his motivations, but hearing from the people he's worked with, that's what really opened my eyes. It showed me that leadership isn't just about policies or beliefs, it's about relationships. And sometimes we underestimate the power of connection. The conversation stayed with her long after the podcast ended. It made her reflect on how much she had grown during this process, not just as a journalist, but as a person. Writing the article had forced her to confront her own biases and assumptions, challenging her to see the world through someone else's eyes. She realized now that true objectivity wasn't about staying neutral. It was about seeking truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Around the same time, Claire received an unexpected email from J.D. Vance himself. At first, she assumed it was a polite thank you note or perhaps a request for clarification. But when she opened the message, she was surprised to find something more personal. Dear Claire, it began. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to understand where I'm coming from. Not everyone is willing to do that, especially when they disagree. Your article reminded me of the importance of humility, not just in politics but in life. Claire read the email several times, each word sinking in deeper than the last. She felt a strange mix of pride and humility herself. Here was a man she had initially approached with skepticism, thanking her for seeing him as more than just a political figure. It was a humbling reminder that people were rarely as one-dimensional as headlines made them seem. Inspired by the exchange, Claire decided to write a follow-up piece, not about J.D. Vance specifically, but about the lessons she had learned throughout this journey. She titled it, Listening Beyond the Noise, and used it as an opportunity to share her reflections on bias, empathy, and the role of storytelling in bridging divides. In the article, she wrote about the importance of stepping outside one's comfort zone, of engaging with perspectives that challenge our worldview. She admitted that she hadn't always gotten it right, but she believed that growth came from embracing discomfort rather than avoiding it. The follow-up resonated with readers in ways Claire hadn't anticipated. Many reached out to share their own experiences of grappling with similar questions, while others expressed gratitude for her vulnerability. One reader wrote, Your willingness to admit uncertainty gives me hope. We live in a world where people are so quick to judge, but your articles remind us that there's value in listening, even when it's hard. As the weeks passed, Claire noticed a subtle shift in how she approached her work. She became more intentional about seeking diverse voices and perspectives, recognizing that every story had layers waiting to be uncovered. She also started paying closer attention to her own reactions, questioning why certain topics triggered strong emotions, and what that revealed about her underlying beliefs. One evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing notes for a new assignment, Claire's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Sarah Bennett, the single mother she had interviewed earlier. Hey Claire, the text read, just wanted to say thanks again for telling my story. It means a lot to know. Someone cares. Claire smiled softly, typing a quick reply. Thank you for sharing your story. It's people like you who remind me why I do what I do. That night, as Claire walked home under a canopy of stars, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But she had learned that the best stories weren't the ones that provided clear answers. They were the ones that invited readers to think, to feel, and to connect. And in doing so, they reminded us of our shared humanity. By the time she reached her apartment, Claire knew one thing for certain. This experience had changed her. It had taught her that journalism wasn't just about reporting facts. It was about building bridges, however fragile they might be. As she climbed into bed, she glanced at her notebook lying open on the bedside table, its pages filled with scribbles and ideas for future stories. Somewhere within those lines lay untold truths waiting to be discovered, and Claire was ready to find them. The next morning, Claire woke up to find her inbox flooded with messages. Readers from across the country had reached out, sharing their thoughts on her recent articles. Some praised her for tackling difficult topics with honesty and courage, while others criticized her for what they saw as a lack of focus or consistency. One email in particular caught her attention. It was from a college student named Emily, who wrote, "Your pieces made me realize how much I take for granted when I judge people based on headlines. Thank you for reminding me to look deeper." Claire smiled as she read the message. It wasn't the first time someone had thanked her for her work, but there was something about Emily's words that resonated deeply. They reminded her why she had chosen this path: to make people think, to challenge assumptions, and to foster understanding. Still, the sheer volume of responses was overwhelming. She spent hours responding to emails, engaging with readers, and reflecting on their feedback. Each interaction added another layer to her understanding of the impact her writing could have. Later that week, Claire received an invitation to speak at a journalism conference in Chicago. The organizers wanted her to share insights from her recent projects, particularly her approach to covering controversial figures like J.D. Vance. At first, Claire hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her strong suit, and the idea of standing in front of a room full of seasoned journalists intimidated her. But after some encouragement from Margaret, she decided to accept the offer, seeing it as an opportunity to grow both personally and professionally. As the date of the conference approached, Claire spent countless hours preparing her presentation. She didn't want to simply recount her experiences. She wanted to inspire others to embrace curiosity and empathy in their own work. She titled her talk, "Beyond Bias: Finding Truth in Unlikely Places," and structured it around key moments from her journey. Her initial skepticism toward J.D. Vance, the conversations that shifted her perspective, and the lessons she had learned along the way. When the day finally arrived, Claire stood backstage, clutching her notes and taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. The auditorium buzzed with energy as attendees filed in, chatting animatedly about the sessions they had attended earlier. As Claire stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent and all eyes turned to her. For a brief moment, she felt paralyzed by self-doubt. Then she remembered the stories she had uncovered, the people she had met, and the connections she had forged. Those memories gave her the confidence to begin. "Good afternoon," she started, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "When I set out to write about J.D. Vance, I thought I knew exactly what kind of story I was telling. What I didn't expect was how much the process would change me." From there, she dove into her narrative, weaving together anecdotes from her interviews and reflections on her own biases. She spoke about the importance of listening, not just to respond but to truly understand, and the value of stepping outside one's comfort zone to uncover hidden truths. The audience listened intently, nodding along as Claire shared her experiences. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several attendees approached her afterward, eager to discuss her perspective and ask for advice on navigating complex stories. One young journalist, barely out of college, told her, "Your talk reminded me why I got into this field. Sometimes it feels like we're supposed to have all the answers, but your story shows that it's okay to admit we don't." The conference left Claire feeling inspired and reinvigorated. She returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to tackle her next assignment. Her editor, Margaret, greeted her with a knowing smile. "I heard your talk went well," she said, handing Claire a folder filled with potential story ideas. "You've earned yourself quite the reputation. Flipping through the documents, Claire landed on a proposal that immediately intrigued her. It involved investigating the intersection of technology and education in rural communities, a topic she hadn't explored before. Though it seemed daunting, she welcomed the challenge, seeing it as another chance to push herself beyond her usual boundaries. Over the following weeks, Claire immersed herself in research, traveling to small towns and speaking with teachers, students, and parents. She quickly discovered that the issues facing these communities were far more nuanced than she had imagined. While technology offered opportunities for growth and innovation, it also highlighted existing inequalities, leaving many schools struggling to keep up. Claire found herself torn between admiration for the resilience of these communities and frustration at the systemic barriers holding them back. One evening, after a long day of interviews, Claire sat in her hotel room, staring at her laptop screen. She had collected pages upon pages of notes, but organizing them into a coherent narrative felt like an impossible task. Just as she was about to give up for the night, her phone rang. It was Sarah Bennett, the single mother she had interviewed months earlier. They hadn't spoken since their meeting at the diner, so Claire was surprised to hear from her. "Hey, Claire," Sarah said, her voice warm and familiar. "I hope it's okay that I called. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." Claire smiled, grateful for the unexpected call. "Of course it's okay. I'm glad you reached out. How are things with you?" They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on life and sharing updates. Sarah mentioned that she had started volunteering at a local community center, helping other families navigate similar challenges to the ones she had faced. Hearing about her efforts filled Claire with a sense of pride and hope. It reminded her that even in the face of adversity, people found ways to support one another and create positive change. Their conversation gave Claire fresh inspiration for her current project. She realized that the heart of the story wasn't just about technology or education. It was about the resilience of communities coming together to overcome obstacles. With renewed energy, she began drafting her article, focusing on the human element behind the data and statistics. She included quotes from her interviews, painting vivid pictures of classrooms buzzing with activity and families working tirelessly to provide better futures for their children. When the article was published, it received widespread acclaim. Readers praised Claire for shedding light on an underreported issue and for highlighting the strength and determination of those affected by it. Once again, Claire found herself fielding interview requests and invitations to speak at events. This time, however, she felt more confident in her ability to handle the attention. She had grown accustomed to the ebb and flow of public opinion, learning to let go of the need for universal approval and instead focusing on staying true to her mission. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Claire made a conscious effort to carve out time for herself. She started journaling regularly, using it as a tool to process her thoughts and emotions. Writing became not just a professional pursuit, but a form of self-care, a way to reconnect with her inner voice amidst the noise of deadlines and expectations. She also rekindled old hobbies, spending weekends hiking in nearby parks or experimenting with new recipes in her kitchen. These simple pleasures helped ground her, reminding her of the importance of balance in her life. One Saturday afternoon, while browsing through a bookstore, Claire stumbled upon a memoir written by a former politician. Intrigued by the author's candid reflections on faith, leadership, and failure, she bought the book and devoured it in a single sitting. The parallels between the author's journey and her own experiences with J.D. Vance struck her deeply. Both stories underscored the complexity of human nature and the power of vulnerability in fostering connection. Inspired by the memoir, Claire decided to revisit her notes from her earlier project. She realized that there was still more to explore, more layers to peel back, more questions to ask. Rather than viewing her previous articles as definitive conclusions, she began to see them as starting points for ongoing conversations. She drafted a proposal for a follow-up series, aiming to delve deeper into the themes of faith, diversity, and leadership in modern America. When she pitched the idea to Margaret, her editor responded with enthusiasm. "This is exactly the kind of work we need right now," Margaret said, giving Claire an approving nod. "Go ahead and run with it." With Margaret's support, Claire threw herself into the new project, determined to dig even deeper than before. She reached out to experts in sociology, theology, and political science, seeking their perspectives on the evolving role of religion in public life. She also revisited some of her original sources, including J.D. Vance, asking follow-up questions that probed beneath the surface. Each conversation revealed new insights, challenging Claire to expand her understanding of the topic. She learned that faith, far from being a monolithic force, manifested in countless ways depending on individual experiences and cultural contexts. She also discovered that leadership, whether rooted in religious beliefs or secular principles, ultimately boiled down to one thing: service. It wasn't about imposing views or achieving perfection. It was about showing up, listening, and striving to make a difference. As Claire worked on the series, she couldn't help but reflect on how much she had grown since embarking on this journey. What had started as a straightforward interview with J.D. Vance had blossomed into a multifaceted exploration of identity. The success of Claire's follow-up series brought her a level of recognition she hadn't anticipated. Her name began appearing in lists of emerging voices in journalism, and invitations to speak at events poured in from all over the country. While the attention was flattering, it also came with challenges. The more visible she became, the more scrutiny she faced. Critics dissected her work, pointing out perceived flaws or questioning her motivations. Some accused her of being too soft on divisive figures like J.D. Vance, while others argued that she wasn't doing enough to challenge the status quo. Claire tried not to let the criticism get to her, but it wasn't always easy. Late at night, after long days of writing and responding to emails, she would sit alone in her apartment, replaying negative comments in her mind. Was she doing enough? Was she staying true to her values? These questions haunted her, even as she reminded herself why she had chosen this path: to tell stories that mattered, no matter how messy or complicated they were. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Claire decided to take a break. She grabbed a blanket and headed to a nearby park where she often went to clear her head. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine trees and damp earth. She found a quiet bench overlooking a small pond and wrapped herself in the blanket, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply breathe, letting the stillness of the moment wash over her. As she sat there, Claire thought about how far she had come since starting this journey. Writing about J.D. Vance had been just the beginning, a catalyst for deeper exploration into themes of faith, leadership, and human connection. Each project had pushed her further outside her comfort zone, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths not only about the world but also about herself. She realized now that growth rarely happened in straight lines. It was messy, unpredictable, and often painful. But it was also beautiful in its own way, like the tangled roots of a tree stretching deep into the soil. The next morning, Claire returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew she couldn't please everyone, and maybe that wasn't the point. What mattered was staying true to her mission: to listen, to learn, and to share stories that sparked meaningful conversations. With that in mind, she turned her focus to a new assignment, one that would take her to a part of the country she had never visited before. The story centered around a small farming community in Iowa, grappling with the effects of climate change. Droughts had devastated crops, leaving families struggling to make ends meet. At the same time, political divisions within the community made it difficult to agree on solutions. Claire saw an opportunity to explore not just the environmental impact, but also the human side of the crisis, the resilience, frustration, and hope that defined daily life for these farmers. Her first stop was a local diner, where she met with a group of farmers who had agreed to speak with her. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, despite the weighty topic at hand. Over plates of pancakes and steaming cups of coffee, the men and women shared their struggles and triumphs. One farmer, a middle-aged man named Tom, spoke passionately about his efforts to adapt to changing conditions. "We've been farming this land for generations," he said, his voice tinged with both pride and sadness. But now it feels like we're fighting a losing battle. Claire listened intently, jotting down notes and asking thoughtful follow-up questions. As the conversation unfolded, she noticed something remarkable. Despite their hardships, these farmers remained hopeful. They talked about experimenting with new techniques, collaborating with neighboring communities, and teaching younger generations the importance of sustainability. Their determination inspired Claire, reminding her of the strength people could find in adversity. Over the next few days, Claire traveled throughout the region, meeting with scientists, activists, and local leaders working to address the crisis. She visited fields ravaged by drought, attended town hall meetings filled with heated debates, and spent evenings chatting with families around kitchen tables. Each interaction added depth to her understanding of the issue, revealing layers she hadn't considered before. Back at her hotel room one night, Claire stared at her notes, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information she had gathered. How could she possibly capture the complexity of this story without oversimplifying it? Then she remembered something Vance had said during their interview months earlier. Faith teaches us to care for others. It struck her that this principle applied not just to religion, but to storytelling as well. To honor the people she had met, she needed to focus on their humanity, their fears, dreams, and unwavering spirit. With that in mind, Claire began drafting her article. She wove together anecdotes from her interviews, painting vivid pictures of sun-scorched fields and determined faces. She highlighted the innovative solutions being implemented, as well as the obstacles standing in the way. And she ended with a call to action, urging readers to consider how they, too, could contribute to addressing the global climate crisis. When the piece was published, it resonated deeply with audiences. Readers praised Claire for shedding light on an urgent issue while amplifying the voices of those directly affected. Many reached out to express their gratitude, sharing personal stories of how the article had inspired them to take action in their own communities. One message in particular stood out. It was from a young woman named Lily who wrote, "Your article made me realize I can't wait for someone else to fix things. I'm going to start volunteering with an environmental organization in my area. Thank you for showing me that even small actions matter." Claire read the message several times, feeling a swell of pride and hope. Moments like these reminded her why she loved what she did. Journalism wasn't just about reporting facts, it was about creating ripples of change, however small they might seem. And sometimes, those ripples grew into waves. In the weeks that followed, Claire continued to receive feedback from readers and colleagues alike. Some offered constructive criticism, pointing out areas where she could improve. Others expressed admiration for her ability to tackle tough topics with empathy and nuance. Through it all, Claire remained focused on her goal, to tell stories that challenged perceptions and fostered understanding. One afternoon, as she prepared for another trip, Claire received an unexpected phone call. It was Vance. He had seen her recent article and wanted to commend her for her work. "You have a gift," he said. "Not many people can write about such complex issues without losing sight of the human element. Keep doing what you're doing. It's making a difference." Claire thanked him, touched by his words. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, reinforcing the idea that connections forged through honest dialogue could transcend differences. As she hung up the phone, she felt a renewed sense of clarity. This journey, this constant pursuit of truth and understanding, wasn't just a career, it was a calling. That evening, Claire packed her bags for her next assignment, reflecting on everything she had learned along the way. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and uncertainty, but she also knew she was ready to face them. After all, every story was an opportunity to grow, to connect, and to remind the world of our shared humanity. As she stepped onto the plane, Claire opened her notebook and began jotting down ideas for future projects. Somewhere out there, untold stories waited to be discovered, and she was eager to find them. Elief and see. Claire's journey took her to places she never imagined, both physically and emotionally. Each new assignment brought fresh challenges, but it also deepened her understanding of the world and her place in it. She had started as a journalist, driven by a desire to uncover truths, but over time, She realized that her role was much bigger than just reporting facts. She was a storyteller, a bridge builder, someone who could connect people through shared experiences and emotions. Her latest project took her to a coastal town in Louisiana, where rising sea levels were threatening homes and livelihoods. The community was divided. Some wanted to fight against the encroaching water, while others believed relocation was the only solution. Claire spent days walking along flooded streets, talking to residents whose lives had been upended by nature's relentless advance. She met fishermen who feared for their future, mothers worried about their children's safety, and elderly couples clinging to the homes they had lived in for decades. One afternoon, Claire sat on a rickety porch with an older woman named Ruth. The wooden planks beneath them creaked as waves lapped at the edge of the yard, just a few feet away. Ruth spoke softly, her voice tinged with sadness but also resilience. "This house has been in my family for 5 generations," she said, gesturing toward the modest structure behind them. "I don't know what I'd do if we had to leave." Claire listened carefully, letting Ruth's words sink in. It wasn't just about losing a home, it was about losing identity, history, and connection. As Ruth talked, Claire felt a lump form in her throat. These weren't abstract issues, they were deeply personal, woven into the fabric of everyday life. She knew her article would need to honor that complexity, to capture not just the facts, but the heartache and hope intertwined within them. Back at her hotel, Claire wrestled with how to tell this story. She wanted to highlight the urgency of the situation without reducing the people involved to mere statistics. She wrote and rewrote sections of the piece, striving to strike the right balance. Finally, she settled on an approach, weaving together individual stories with broader context, showing how global forces impacted local lives. When the article went live, it struck a chord with readers, many of whom reached out to share their own struggles with environmental change. The feedback reminded Claire of something she had learned early in her career. Every story mattered because every person mattered. Whether she was writing about farmers in Iowa, families in Louisiana, or politicians like J.D. Vance, her goal was always the same: to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. And though the work was often exhausting, it was also profoundly rewarding. As months passed, Claire began to notice subtle shifts in herself. She no longer approached interviews with the same guarded skepticism she once had. Instead, she came to each conversation with openness, ready to listen and learn. This shift didn't mean she abandoned her critical eye. Rather, it allowed her to see people as multidimensional, full of contradictions and complexities. It made her writing richer, more nuanced, and ultimately more impactful. One day, while scrolling through social media, Claire stumbled upon a post from Emily, the college student who had written to her months earlier. Emily had started a blog, inspired by Claire's work, focusing on underreported issues in her community. "Your articles taught me that journalism can be a force for good," Emily wrote. "Thank you for showing me the power of storytelling." Claire smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Moments like these reminded her why she kept pushing forward, even when the road felt uncertain. Her work wasn't just about reaching wide audiences, it was about inspiring others to use their voices too. Around the same time, Claire received an invitation to speak at a national conference focused on the future of journalism. The theme was Truth in Turbulent Times, and organizers asked her to deliver the closing keynote address. At first, Claire hesitated. Speaking to thousands of people seemed daunting, especially given the weight of the topic. But after some encouragement from Margaret, she accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to reflect on everything she had learned. Preparing for the speech was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Claire spent hours crafting her remarks, drawing on her experiences over the past year. She titled her talk, "Finding Light in the Darkness," and structured it around key lessons she had gleaned from her journey. She spoke about the importance of empathy, the value of vulnerability, and the courage it took to confront uncomfortable truths. When the day of the conference arrived, Claire stood backstage, clutching her notes and taking deep breaths. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as attendees filed in. chatting excitedly about the sessions they had attended earlier. As Claire stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. For a moment, she froze, overwhelmed by the sea of faces staring back at her. Then she remembered Ruth's determination, Tom's resilience, and Sarah's gratitude. Their stories gave her strength, and she began to speak. "Journalism is not just about reporting facts," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her body. "It's about bearing witness to the human experience, the joys, the sorrows, the triumphs, and the failures. In a world that often feels divided, our job is to remind people of what connects us." The audience listened intently, nodding along as Claire shared anecdotes from her travels and reflections on her growth as a journalist. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several attendees approached her afterward, eager to discuss her perspective and ask for advice on navigating challenging stories. One young reporter told her, "Your talk reminded me why I got into this field. Sometimes it feels like we're supposed to have all the answers, but your story shows that it's okay to admit we don't." The conference reinforced Claire's belief in the transformative power of storytelling. Over the following weeks, she continued to receive messages from aspiring journalists inspired by her work. Some sought mentorship, while others simply wanted to express gratitude. Each message filled her with a sense of purpose, reminding her that her efforts extended far beyond the pages of her articles. As the year drew to a close, Claire found herself reflecting on how much had changed since she first interviewed Vance. What had begun as a single question, whether faith could coexist with public service, had blossomed into a multifaceted exploration of identity, leadership, and connection. Along the way, Claire had confronted her own biases, embraced discomfort, and emerged stronger for it. One evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing notes for a new project, Claire paused to look out the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, blanketing the city in a soft, white glow. She thought about all the people she had met, the stories she had told, and the lessons she had learned. Journalism wasn't just a job for her. It was a way of life, a commitment to seeking truth and fostering understanding. With a contented sigh, Claire turned back to her notebook and began jotting down ideas for the next chapter of her journey. Somewhere out there, untold stories waited to be discovered, and she was ready to find them.